If you're like us, you've encountered that alphanumeric code that, sits right at the very top of the luxury meat pyramid. A5 Wagyu.
Hmm.
That designation, it carries this extraordinary mystique. It's a guarantee of unparalleled quality and definitely a guarantee that you are about to pay a very steep price.
A very steep price.
But what is that price actually buying? I mean, is A5 just a feeling or is it a measurement?
It is entirely a measurement, and the precision involved is, well, it's startling. When you say A5, you are talking about the absolute zenith of bovine production.
Okay.
And it's all defined by these rigorous, almost unforgiving standards from the Japan Meat Grading Association, or JMGA.
Right.
So for anyone who wants to be truly informed about high-end food or even the economics of livestock, you really have to look past the marketing and, understand the technical matrix.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We've gone into the technical documentation of those JMGA standards. We are here to really unpack this two-dimensional matrix. The yield grade, that's the letter A, B, or C, and then the quality grade, the number 1 through 5. It's kind of a shortcut to understanding how perfection gets defined mathematically.
And chemically. But before we even get into the grading, we have to establish the ground rules. This whole system, it rests on absolute genetic purity and traceability.
So to even get in the door for this kind of scrutiny, what are the requirements?
The animal has to be one of the 4 indigenous Japanese breeds. Overwhelmingly, that's the Japanese black, or Kuroge Washu.
So no crossbreeds. If you want a real JMGA score, it has to be pure.
No crossbreeds allowed. And that lineage, it has to be verifiable with a unique ID number that you can trace all the way back to its birth.
Wow. Okay.
Precisely. And the physical evaluation, the moment of truth, so to speak, that happens when the chilled carcass is sliced or ribbed right between the 6th and 7th rib.
And that one cut surface is where everything is decided.
That's where both of our grading pillars are quantified.
Okay, let's start with that first pillar then. The quantitative one. The yield grade, A, B, C. This is the producer's grade, isn't it?
It is, yes.
It sounds a little dry compared to talking about, melting on your tongue, marbling, but this is pure business.
It's all about efficiency. The yield grade measures cutability, so the proportion of lean, saleable meat you get relative to the total carcass weight.
Which makes sense. If you're investing, 600 days or more into feeding one of these animals?
We need to ensure the maximum possible return.
So what's the threshold for hitting that top grade, for grade A?
Grade A is the gold standard. It's reserved for carcasses that have an estimated yield of 72% or higher. They call it above average.
And B and C.
Grade B is average, so that's from 69% up to just under 72%. And grade C is, anything below 69%.
Now, here's where it gets really technical.
Hmm.
How do they calculate that percentage? I mean, they're not actually weighing every single piece of meat.
Oh, absolutely not. No, this percentage is derived from a pretty complex piece of science,
Right.
a multiple regression equation. This is not a subjective guess, it's a formula. And it uses 4 specific physical measurements that are taken right at that ribbing site.
So what are those 4 inputs? What feeds the math?
Okay, so you're measuring, first, the size of the ribeye area, second, the thickness of the short rib, third, the thickness of the subcutaneous fat.
That's the external fat, the stuff on the outside.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
fourth, the weight of the cold left side of the carcass. Those 4 inputs tell a grader precisely how efficient that animal was at turning feed into useful muscle.
That's really specific. But wait, if it's a standard mathematical equation, how does the JMGA account for the fact that Wagyu is just built differently than, say, a normal commercial steer?
That is the crucial insight. It's a great question. Because Wagyu breeds naturally have a superior muscle-to-bone ratio and very specific fat patterns, the JMGA actually adds a constant figure 2.049 to the result.
So it's like a handicap.
It's more of a built-in bonus, but it only applies to authentic, purebred Wagyu. This constant is a mathematical acknowledgement that the breed itself is just inherently more efficient.
That's fascinating. So the system itself rewards the producer for raising a genetically pure animal. It's baked right into the score.
It is. Now, if you think about the logic of the variables themselves, the bigger the ribeye and the thicker the short rib, the higher the score. More yield.
That's good. But what about that subcutaneous fat? That's the outer layer, which is mostly waste for the really premium cuts. So a lot of that must drag the score down.
Precisely. Increases in that external fat, it acts as a negative in the equation. It signals less efficiency.
In the overall weight.
A heavier left side weight can often indicate more bone or connective tissue you don't want, so that also pulls the score down. And there's one last check.
What's that?
If the intermuscular fat, and this is the undesirable stuff between muscle groups, not the good marbling within them, if that's too thick, the grader can just manually knock the yield grade down by 1 rank.
Wow. That is an intense level of precision, and that's just for the producer side of things.
Mhm.
Which brings us perfectly to the second, and I guess more famous dimension, the qualitative pillar, the meat quality grade 1 through 5.
Right. We've got the quantity, the A, now we need the sensory perfection, the 5.
This is where we shift from economics to aesthetics.
To flavor, to the eating experience, yes. The numeric grade 1 to 5 is a composite score. It's based on 4 distinct qualitative factors that all have to align perfectly.
And these 4 factors are what define that A5 experience.
That's right. They are 1, the beef marbling standard, the BMS. 2, the meat color and brightness, or BCS.
Okay.
3 is firmness and texture. And number 4 is the fat color, luster, and quality, the BFS.
It sounds like a simple checklist, but the way they calculate the final grade, this is the key. This is what makes A5 so special.
It is.
You have to remember this rule. The final quality grade is determined by the lowest score you get in any of those 4 individual categories.
And that is the unforgiving gatekeeper. This is so critical for you to understand why A5 is so rare. Just imagine a scenario. A carcass scores a perfect 5 in marbling. A 5 in meat color, a 5 in texture. It looks absolutely superb. But the fat color is just a little bit yellowish. It only manages to score a 3.
In that case, the final grade isn't some kind of average. It's not a 5, it's a 3.
Exactly. The final official quality grade for that entire animal is a 3. That one minor flaw, which only a trained grader might even see, it drops the value of that carcass by thousands of dollars.
That's how high the bar is.
Incredibly high.
Okay, so let's dig into those benchmarks, starting with the one everyone knows. Beef Marbling Standard, BMS.
Right. The marbling, or the intramuscular fat, is quantified on a 12-point scale. It runs from number 1 up to number 12.
And those points represent the density and the fineness of the fat specs.
The density, the distribution, everything, yes. And to get that grade 5 quality designation, you have to hit a BMS of number 8, all the way up through number 12.
Our sources describe this as extremely abundant. This is where you get that famous, intricate snowflake pattern.
But you know, the visual appeal is really only half the story. The chemical makeup of this specific kind of fat is what truly matters.
You mean the oleic acid?
The oleic acid, exactly. Wagyu marbling is extremely rich in it, which gives the fat that incredibly low melting point.
Often below human body temperature.
Precisely. So when people say true A5 melts on your tongue, that's not just some poetic marketing phrase. It's a literal, direct consequence of thermal science.
That's amazing. It connects the biology of the animals straight to the plate. Okay, what about the other 3 requirements for a grade 5? Let's start with color.
The meat color standard, or BCS, it needs a vibrant, healthy cherry red color, ideally a number 3 to number 5 on their color chart. But just as important, it also has to have very good brightness, a gloss.
So any dullness is an automatic downgrade.
Instant downgrade. It could signal poor handling or age.
And texture. What makes a perfect score there?
For firmness and texture, the muscle fibers have to be very fine. The cut surface should look almost velvety, not coarse or stringy. The meat also needs excellent firmness, which is a sign of good moisture retention.
And finally, the fat itself gets its own report card.
Yes, the beef fat standard, BFS. For a grade 5, the fat must be either pure white or a very light cream color. And it needs to have a high luster or gloss.
Which again is another sign of that good oleic acid content.
It's another visual indicator of a superior flavor profile. If that external fat is matte or it's leaning toward yellow, the grade drops instantly, and it takes the entire quality score down with it, thanks to that lowest score rule.
So we finally arrived at the full hierarchy. Yield grade A, quality grade 5. The A5 pinnacle.
A5 means you have hit that 72% yield efficiency, and you have secured a perfect score across all 4 of those sensory criteria.
And while a BMS of 8 is the minimum to get a 5.
The truly elite A5 is often hitting a BMS of 10, 11, or even 12, and because of that extreme richness, it's rarely served in large portions. You're looking at maybe 2 to 4 ounces. It's just decadent.
Now, A4 is a really fascinating tier. I've heard some chefs argue the A4 experience is actually better. What defines an A4?
A4 generally means the marbling score is a little bit lower, so it lands in that BMS 5 to 7 range. It still has abundant, high-quality marbling, supreme tenderness. But the ratio of lean meat to fat is less aggressive than A5.
So you get that unique Wagyu flavor and mouthfeel, but you also get a more substantial, beefier bite that isn't quite so overwhelming.
Exactly. It provides a fantastic equilibrium. You can enjoy a slightly larger portion. It's often why chefs who want to showcase that deep umami beef flavor alongside the tenderness might actually pick a high A4 over an extreme A5.
And then we move down to A3, which, by international standards is still incredibly high-quality
Oh,
beef.
absolutely. A3 is a BMS of 3 to 4. Our sources note that this is the standard high-quality domestic grade in Japan. And even at this level, it's superior to almost any international prime grade beef.
And the lower tiers, A1 and A2.
They just lack sufficient marbling. They're often redirected to the domestic market for processed meats, not for premium steakhouse cuts.
This brings us back to the economic reality of that yield grade. You could have an A5 steak or a B5 steak. If the quality is a 5, the eating experience is identical.
Identical.
But for the producer, hitting that A is critical.
It's pure volume efficiency. A grade A carcass gives the processor significantly more usable, highly profitable premium cuts than a B or C carcass of the exact same weight. It maximizes the return on their investment.
That level of rigor is really why the JMGA system stands apart globally. Which brings us to, how do other countries compare?
The differences are stark, and they really illustrate some fundamental divides in philosophy. Let's look at Australia first. Their system, the MS, runs from 0 to 9 plus
Okay.
But since the Japanese BMS scale goes all the way up to 12, an Australian MS9 plus their absolute highest designation, that typically only corresponds to a Japanese BMS of 7 to 9.
So the Japanese system just has a higher ceiling for defining what extreme marbling is.
It does, but there's a husbandry difference too. Australian Wagyu often has a feeding period of around 350 to 450 days. In Japan, for the highest grades, you're looking at 600 days or more.
And that extra time is what develops that depth of marbling and the oleic acid.
It's crucial for achieving that low melting point. The systems are really measuring different investment timelines.
And what about compared to the U.S. system? Prime, choice, select.
Well, the USDA defines prime as having abundant marbling. And while prime is excellent beef, that standard typically only equates to a Japanese BMS of 3 to 4.
So that's an A3 in the GMGA system.
It is. So if you're buying crossbred American Wagyu, the USDA prime label doesn't even come close to describing the ultra-high marbling that those cattle can achieve.
Which is why we see those proprietary scales, right?
Yeah.
Beyond prime or gold grade.
Exactly. They're essentially creating their own internal A4 standard because the official USDA system just doesn't have the technical granularity to measure true A5 quality.
When finally, within Japan itself, some brands add yet another layer of scrutiny.
They create hyperstandards. A brand like Kobe or Sendai beef will often impose requirements that are above the baseline JMGA standards. Sendai beef, for instance, will only certify cattle with a JMGA rating of A5 or B5. So if a carcass was graded A4, it's still a phenomenal piece of meat, but it simply couldn't carry the Sendai brand name.
That regional exclusivity just cements the prestige even further. Okay, let's bring this all home for you, the listener. The key takeaway here is that A5 is not a subjective opinion. It's not a marketing term.
Not at all. It is a quantified, perfect score on a highly technical matrix.
It requires achieving that yield grade A, that superior efficiency of 72% cutability, and the quality grade 5.
Which means hitting the highest mark across 4 distinct sensory parameters: the marbling, the color, the texture, and the fat quality.
And you have to remember that lowest score rule. That single unforgiving mechanism is what maintains the integrity of the whole system. Perfection in 3 categories means nothing if the 4th has a slight flaw.
The ultimate achievement, A5. It represents this perfect convergence of genetics, meticulous husbandry over 600+ days, and cold, hard math.
It's about maximizing flavor, ensuring that low melting point, and also maximizing the producer's economic return.
That's right. That's superior yield.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you. The dual focus of this JMGA system, yield grade A and quality grade 5, it really shows us that the pursuit of the culinary ideal is entirely dictated by economics. If A5 is the pinnacle of sensory pleasure, the need for that rigorous 72% yield math is fundamentally about reducing waste and maximizing the return on the incredibly complex and expensive inputs required to raise this specific animal. So take a moment to consider how the physiological difference between that intramuscular fat, the buttery marbling in Wagyu versus the subcutaneous fat on other breeds makes this whole complex grading system even possible in the first place.